Hey everybody, this is Josh from Pretty Good Books. I've got a book here I think you should read. It's called The Great Influenza by John Barry. A book I think you should read. A-B-I-T-Y-S-R. Appetizer. This is your appetizer. We've got some copies here at the store, but I've got a link down in the description for our bookshop page. Bookshop is a great service. It sends books directly from the publisher to your house and at the same time supports independent bookstores like Pretty Good Books here in lovely LaGrange. The Great Influenza is a fantastic book for a number of reasons. Now, I know that several people at this point are done talking about pandemics. They would much rather have their reading be escapist. On the opposite end of the spectrum, they'd much rather go full dystopian with their reading and stuff, and that's fine. But for me, I found some solace in the historical nature of this. The 1918 influenza epidemic was the worst epidemic in human history. Per capita, it killed more people than the bubonic plague. What Barry does is he digs down deep historically into what was going on at the time, into sort of a play-by-play of everything that happened during the pandemic, as well as the history of medicine up until that point. So he starts all the way back at Hippocrates up to the beginning of the 20th century and talked about some of the struggles that these scientific medical doctors had, in that they're still pushing up against older ideas, the miasma theory of medicine, that it was the bad air or the bad smell that caused disease, or even the idea that your humors were out of balance. So they were still doing bloodletting back in the early 20th century, not that long ago. And so what Barry does is he tracks the progression of the disease and the ways in which it moved through society, and the ways that these researchers, these doctors, sort of caught up with it and were able to eventually develop a vaccine for it. One thing that I found absolutely fascinating about this is the ways in which I never fully appreciated how difficult the work of research science is. In order to develop a vaccine, you have to first fail to develop a vaccine for years and years and years, and it's a long and arduous process where the result is never guaranteed. And so I guess I came away from this book really appreciating even further the amount of work that these researchers are doing. I also found it strangely heartening that the 1918 flu epidemic was so much worse than the COVID-19 experience that we're going through now. Over 675,000 Americans were killed by the flu epidemic, whereas at the time of recording we're only at about 100,000 Americans have died, which is still obviously tragic, but just the details that Barry gives in his descriptions of the ways that the influenza epidemic affected society and affected families and stuff. It's also interesting to see the ways in which our current reaction to the pandemic are both similar and dissimilar to what happened 100 years ago. So, for example, initially, when the influenza first started spreading through the United States, a lot of people said, oh, it's just the common grip. It's just a common cold. It's not something to worry about. It's not something to be concerned about. They tried to use malaria drugs to treat influenza with basically no success whatsoever. There was also a lot of conspiracy theories about the origins of the Great Influenza. A lot of people thought that Germany had created the superbug to help them win the war against the United States. This was during World War I. A lot of people thought the disease would subside when the warmer summer months came, and it did in fact subside for a little bit, but then came roaring back in the fall with a whole new wave of infections. And so the ways it's similar are interesting, and the ways that it's dissimilar are also interesting. It's got me thinking a lot about what we do with history. Like, do we actually study history for any reason? Like, are we doomed to repeat the same things that we've done for the past 100 years? Do we actually learn from history or not? You could maybe make an argument that the 2008 financial crisis or something like that wasn't as bad as it could have been because the people in charge at the time were good students of the things that led up to the Great Depression. You could argue maybe that because some East Asian countries recently experienced like the SARS outbreaks and things like that, they haven't been as hard hit by COVID-19 because they've taken steps to mitigate those things. But in the end, nobody really knows. There's no way to know what would have happened if we had done something differently. All we can know is what's happened in the past and what's happening now, which is why I think you should read this book. Thanks a lot. I've got a link in the description for where you can order this. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. See you later.